Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepless Scientist, a quiet place where your thoughts can loosen their grip and curiosity can rest beside you without asking for effort. Tonight's journey drifts into something familiar, yet strangely unsettling. Dreams. Not the fleeting kind that dissolve by morning, but the ones that linger, the ones that feel as though you stepped out of a life rather than woke up from an image. You may have felt it before, the gentle confusion of waking with a sense that something was still happening somewhere else, a place left unfinished, a version of you still moving. Before we settle in, if these calm explorations feel comforting to you, you're welcome to like this video and subscribe, and if you're awake enough to feel sociable, leave a comment sharing where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always quietly wonderful to see how many different nights gather here together. Now, let the room soften. Perhaps dim the lights, or let a steady hum fill the background. And as we begin, know that nothing here asks you to believe anything. We're simply going to notice gently what your mind already knows how to do. If your thoughts wander, that's perfectly fine. We'll still be here. Sometimes waking up doesn't feel like returning. It feels more like leaving. You open your eyes, the room slowly comes into focus, and yet there is a quiet resistance inside you. A sense that something was still happening moments ago. Not just an image, not a fragment, but a continuity, a flow, a life that had weight and direction, and now, abruptly, it's gone. Not erased exactly, just out of reach. Many dreams fade quickly, dissolving like mist once the day begins, but others linger with surprising insistence. You may remember a place you were moving through, a conversation that hadn't finished, a version of yourself who was making choices that felt natural in that moment, even if they don't quite match the person you are when awake. What's striking about these dreams isn't how strange they are, it's how normal they feel while they're happening. Inside the dream, nothing asks to be explained. You don't question how you arrived there. You don't ask why this feels familiar, or why you already seem to know the rules of the world you're in. You simply continue, you live forward. And when you wake up, the loss can feel oddly specific, not dramatic, not overwhelming. Just quietly heavy, as if you stepped away from something that was still unfolding. This feeling is more common than we tend to admit. Many people describe waking from certain dreams with a sense of displacement, like returning from a journey that didn't announce itself as one. The mind doesn't say, that was a dream, it says you were somewhere. What makes this experience unsettling is not the imagery. Dreams have always been strange. What makes it unsettling is coherence, sequence, emotional continuity. You weren't just watching something happen, you were participating, acting, responding, caring, and perhaps most intriguingly, you were being someone. That version of you may have behaved differently, made decisions you wouldn't make during the day, reacted with confidence where you might hesitate, or with calm up where you might usually feel fear. Yet inside the dream, those reactions felt completely natural. You didn't feel out of character. You felt like yourself, just configured differently. This raises a gentle question, one we won't try to answer too quickly. If a dream can host a version of you that feels authentic while it's happening, what exactly defines who you are? Is it memory? Is it habit? Is it the environment you're responding to? Or is it something quieter, something more adaptable than we usually assume? There's a tendency to dismiss dreams as fiction the moment we wake up. We label them as imagination, as random neural noise, as the brain amusing itself while the body rests. And there is truth in that framing. The brain is active, it is creative, it is remarkably good at weaving stories from fragments. But that explanation alone doesn't account for the emotional realism of certain dreams, the way they feel lived rather than viewed. the way they sometimes leave behind not just images, but a kind of aftertaste, a mood, a longing, a sense of unfinished movement. Consider this. When you remember a real place you've been, you don't recall every detail. You remember the feeling of being there, the way time moved, the emotional tone. Dreams can carry that same quality. Not sharp recollection, but lived atmosphere. And atmosphere is powerful. Inside these dreams, time often behaves differently. Hours can pass without clocks. Days can unfold without calendars, yet everything feels ordered. Events follow one another with a sense of cause and consequence. You do something and something else happens because of it. The story moves forward. This sense of narrative is important. It's one of the key ingredients that makes an experience feel real to the mind. When events follow one another meaningfully, the brain treats them as part of a lived sequence, not a collage of images. Which is why waking up can sometimes feel like stepping off a moving walkway. The momentum doesn't stop all at once. It fades slowly, leaving behind a strange quiet. And in that quiet, a thought may drift in, not loudly, not insistently, but softly enough that you might not even put it into words. What if that wasn't just a story, not a question that demands belief, just a moment of curiosity, a pause? Because tonight isn't about proving that dreams are something extraordinary. It's about noticing that they already feel that way to the mind experiencing them. Long before physics, long before philosophy, long before theories of parallel realities, the human experience of dreaming has always carried this subtle tension, the sense that consciousness is capable of stepping into worlds that are complete on their own terms. As we continue, we'll begin to look gently at how the brain creates these worlds and why they feel so convincing. We'll explore how identity can shift without breaking, and how awareness can inhabit different configurations without losing its sense of self. But for now, it's enough to simply notice the feeling, that sense of waking from somewhere, that quiet impression that just moments ago, another version of your life was in motion, and that perhaps you were there. There's a difference between seeing something and being somewhere. Most dreams pass through the mind like images on a screen. A face appears, a moment flickers, a fragment of story dissolves before it can settle. But some dreams behave differently. They don't present themselves as pictures. They arrive as places. You don't just see a room, you move through it. You don't just notice a street. You know which way to turn. There is a sense of orientation, of spatial memory, even when nothing about the place resembles anywhere you've been before. What makes this especially strange is not how detailed these dream places are, it's how familiar they feel. You may wake up remembering a building you've never visited in waking life, yet inside the dream you knew where the stairs were. You knew which door led outside. You may not recall how you learned this, only that the knowledge was already there, quietly waiting to be used. This kind of familiarity does not feel like memory in the usual sense. It doesn't arrive as a recollection, something pulled from the past. It feels more like recognition without origin, a sense of belonging without history. An easy way to picture this is to imagine walking into a house you've never seen, yet somehow knowing where the light switch is. You don't remember being told. You don't remember practicing. You just reach, and your hand finds it. Dreams can carry this same quality of effortless knowing. Some people describe returning to the same dream locations across different nights, not always in a clear sequence, and not always with conscious memory linking one dream to the next. Yet, when they arrive, there is a quiet internal response. This place again. The mind doesn't announce it. There is no signpost saying, "You have been here before." Instead, there is a subtle easing, a sense that the environment already makes sense, as if the dream is picking up where something once left off, even if you cannot remember when. What's important here is that this familiarity does not rely on explicit memory. You don't need to remember the previous dream in order to feel oriented in the current one. The sense of place exists independently, like a background signal that doesn't require explanation. This suggests something gentle but profound. The mind is capable of generating context without narrative. It can create worlds that feel stable, without requiring a detailed story of how they came to be. In waking life, our sense of place is built over time. We learn layouts, we memorize routes, we build familiarity through repetition. In dreams, this process seems compressed, or perhaps bypassed altogether. The feeling of being somewhere arrives fully formed. One way to understand this is to think of the brain as constantly maintaining an internal map, not just of physical spaces, but of meaning. When you are awake, this map is anchored to sensory input. Light, sound, texture, movement. All of it feeds into the map and keeps it aligned with the outside world. During sleep, that external input grows quiet. The map does not disappear. It simply turns inward. Instead of mapping the world around you, the brain begins mapping itself. Emotions, expectations, fragments of memory, imagined possibilities. These elements are woven together into an environment that feels navigable, even if it has never existed before. And navigation is the key word. You don't just observe these dream spaces, you act within them, you decide where to go, you respond to what happens next. The world reacts to you in return. Doors open, conversations unfold, events follow one another with a sense of internal logic. This is why these dreams feel less like stories being told to you, and more like places you're inhabiting. Another interesting detail is how these dream places often feel emotionally coherent. The mood of the environment matches your internal state. A calm dream world tends to unfold slowly, with soft transitions and gentle pacing. A tense one feels compressed, urgent, filled with narrow paths and sudden changes. The environment is not neutral, it is expressive. In waking life, we usually separate our emotions from the places we're in. A room remains the same whether we're anxious or relaxed. In dreams, the boundary dissolves. The place and the feeling become one. This blending helps explain why waking up from certain dreams can feel disorienting. You're not just leaving a setting, you're stepping out of an entire emotional climate. And yet, while these experiences feel rich and immersive, they're rarely questioned while they're happening. Inside the dream, the mind does not pause to analyze its surroundings. It does not ask how the place was constructed or why it feels familiar. It simply accepts the environment as given. This acceptance is part of what makes the experience so convincing. Only later, when you wake, does the question arise, where was I? Not as a philosophical puzzle, but as a genuine feeling of displacement. As though you had been somewhere real enough to miss, but impossible to return to at will. At this stage, there is no need to introduce explanations involving physics or alternate realities. It is enough to notice that the mind can create spaces that feel stable, meaningful, and inhabited. Spaces that support a sense of self moving through them. That alone is remarkable, because it tells us something important about consciousness. It is not limited to reacting to the world as it is given. It can generate worlds of its own, complete with orientation, continuity, and emotional depth. As we continue, we will begin to look more closely at how the brain performs this quiet act of world building and why it feels so effortless while it's happening. We'll explore how these inner landscapes borrow the structure of reality without copying its surface, and how the sense of being there can arise even when nothing external is present. For now, it's enough to sit with the image, a place you've never been, yet somehow know. A world that holds you without asking for explanation, and the strange feeling upon waking that you have just stepped out of it. When we think about reality, we usually imagine it arriving fully formed from the outside world. Light enters the eyes, sound reaches the ears, the brain, we assume, simply receives what is already there. But this is not quite how it works. A more accurate way to picture the brain is not as a window, but as a builder. It takes signals, fragments, and hints, then assembles them into something coherent. What you experience as the world is not a direct copy of what surrounds you. It is a careful construction, created moment by moment inside your own mind. You can think of it like listening to the radio. Music does not exist inside the device itself. Instead, invisible waves pass through the air and the radio translates them into sound. If the signal weakens, the music crackles. If the receiver changes, the sound changes with it. Your brain works in a similar way. It constantly receives information from the senses, then transforms that information into a living, navigable environment. Colours, depth, movement, faces, voices, the feeling of being located in space. All of this is assembled internally. So smoothly, in fact, that we rarely notice the process. When you are awake, this internal construction stays tightly synchronized with the outside world. The brain uses ongoing sensory input to keep its model aligned. If you move your head, the scene shifts. If you reach for a cup, your hand meets its surface. The internal map and the external world remain in steady agreement. During sleep, something subtle changes. The senses grow quiet. The stream of outside information fades, but the brain does not power down. The builder does not stop working. Instead, it turns inward. With fewer signals coming from the outside, the brain begins to rely more heavily on its own internal patterns. Memories, emotions, expectations, and imagined possibilities take the place of sight and sound. From these elements, the brain continues doing what it has always done, constructing a world. This is why dreams do not feel empty or vague. They feel structured. You are somewhere. You are someone. Things happen in relation to one another. The same systems that help you experience reality during the day are active at night, only with different ingredients. An important detail here is that the brain does not treat waking reality and dreaming reality as separate categories. There is no internal label that says, "This is real," and another that says, "This is imagined." The brain only works with the information available to it in the moment. When sensory input is rich and consistent, the brain builds a world anchored to the physical environment. When sensory input is minimal, the brain builds a world anchored to internal signals instead. From the inside, both experiences can feel equally complete. This helps explain why dreams often feel convincing while they're happening. The brain is not trying to deceive you. It is doing what it always does, creating a coherent environment that allows awareness to move, respond, and exist within it. You can see this world-building ability even while awake. When you close your eyes and imagine walking through a familiar place, your mind does not produce random images. It generates a structured space. You know where the walls are. You know where the path turns. You may even feel a sense of distance as you move through it mentally. Dreaming is this same capacity, amplified and untethered from external correction. Another way to picture this is to imagine a theatre stage. During the day, the stage is lit by bright spotlights coming from the outside world. Every detail is guided by what is actually present. At night, the lights dim, and the stage is illuminated from within. The props are drawn from memory and emotion. The actors follow internal cues rather than external scripts. Yet the play continues. What's remarkable is how little effort this seems to require. You do not consciously decide to build a dream world. You do not plan its architecture or assign its characters. The environment simply unfolds, complete with depth, motion, and emotional tone. This effortlessness is one of the reasons dream worlds feel natural rather than artificial. The brain has been practicing this kind of construction your entire life. From infancy onward, it has been turning raw signals into meaningful experience. Dreams are not a new skill. They're a variation on a very old one. This understanding also gently reframes the question of reality. If the brain is always constructing your experience, then the difference between waking life and dreaming life is not a difference in kind, but a difference in source. One draws from the outside, the other draws from within. Neither feels assembled while you're inside it. This does not mean that dreams and waking life are the same. The physical world has consistency, shared structure, and consequences that dreams do not. You wake up in the same room. Gravity behaves predictably. Other people remember what happened yesterday. But it does mean that the feeling of being somewhere does not require an external location. It only requires a brain capable of building a space that awareness can inhabit. And your brain is exceptionally good at that. As we continue, we will look more closely at what happens to the sense of self inside these internally built worlds, how identity shifts without collapsing, how you can feel like yourself while behaving differently, and how the mind supports multiple versions of you without confusion. For now, it's enough to rest with this idea that the world you experience, whether awake or asleep, is not something you step into. It is something that quietly forms around you. While you're dreaming, something curious happens. You rarely stop to ask whether the experience is real. No alarm bell rings in the mind. No internal voice interrupts to say, "This doesn't make sense." Instead, you accept what is happening with an ease that can feel almost surprising once you're awake again. You may be flying without questioning gravity. You may be speaking to someone long gone without noticing the impossibility. You may find yourself in a place that bends logic in subtle ways, and yet nothing inside the dream feels wrong. This acceptance is not a failure of intelligence. It is a feature of how the mind works when it is resting. When you're awake, a particular part of your mental landscape stays quietly active. It monitors, checks, compares. It asks whether events line up with expectation and experience. It helps you notice contradictions. It is the part of you that pauses and thinks, "That can't be right." During certain phases of sleep, that internal editor grows quieter, not absent, but softened. You can imagine it like a librarian who usually keeps careful track of every book in the room. During dreams, the librarian steps away from the desk. The room remains full of books, stories, and ideas, but no one is checking whether they're filed in the correct order. With this gentle loosening of oversight, the mind becomes more permissive. It allows scenes to unfold without constant verification. Events are judged by how they feel, not by whether they align with the waking rules. At the same time, the emotional centers of the mind remain active. In some cases, they become even more responsive than they are during the day. This combination is important. It explains why dreams often carry strong feelings without strong logic. Fear, joy, longing, relief, curiosity. These emotions move freely through the dream environment. They color the experience and give it weight. And because emotions are powerful signals, the mind treats what is happening as meaningful. When something feels meaningful, it feels real. Think about how easily this happens even when you're awake. A story can move you to tears, even though you know it is fiction. A memory can trigger physical reactions long after the event has passed. Emotion does not require proof to be convincing. In dreams, emotion becomes the primary guide. This is why the realism of dreams is often emotional rather than visual. You may not remember every detail of what you saw, but you remember how it felt to be there. The sense of urgency, the comfort of familiarity, the tension of waiting for something to happen. Because the mind is not constantly checking reality, it allows the emotional narrative to lead. The result is an experience that feels lived rather than imagined. Another way to understand this is to consider how trust works in daily life. When you trust someone, you do not examine every word they say for hidden meaning. You listen, respond, and move forward. Trust reduces friction. In dreams, the mind trusts itself. It trusts the environment it is generating. It trusts the continuity of the experience. And because that trust is not challenged, the dream flows smoothly from one moment to the next. This flow is part of what makes dreams feel immersive. There are few sharp interruptions. Transitions happen without explanation. Scenes shift gently, often without you noticing the change until you're already somewhere else. This is also why waking up can feel abrupt. The internal editor returns quickly, and with it comes contrast. Suddenly, inconsistencies stand out. The logic that was absent a moment ago switches back on. The dream does not collapse because it was weak. Also, it collapses because the rules have changed. It can be comforting to realize that the mind is not easily fooled. It is simply operating under different conditions. The same system that helps you navigate the world during the day is responsible for the vividness of your dreams at night. One mode prioritizes accuracy. The other prioritizes experience. Neither is wrong. They serve different purposes. This understanding helps explain why certain dreams can leave a strong impression even after you wake. The emotional imprint remains, even as the logical framework dissolves. You may not remember what led to a particular moment in the dream, but you remember how that moment felt. That feeling lingers because emotions are stored differently than details. They do not require a clear storyline to persist. They remain as a tone, a quiet echo. It also explains why trying to analyze a dream too quickly can make it slip away. The act of analysis pulls the experience back into waking logic. The dream, which thrived in the emotional flow, fades under scrutiny. There is no need to rush this process. For now, it is enough to notice that dreams feel real, because the mind allows them to be real, on their own terms. They are not meant to withstand interrogation. They are meant to be experienced. As we move forward, we will begin to explore what happens to the sense of self within this emotionally guided world. How identity remains intact even as circumstances shift, and how you can feel like yourself while acting in ways that surprise you once you are awake. For the moment, rest with this gentle idea that the realism of dreams is not an illusion, but a different way of experiencing reality, one guided by feeling rather than verification. And that while you are dreaming, the mind is not asking whether the world makes sense, it is simply living within it. There is a common assumption that if something is a simulation, it must be less important than reality. But this assumption doesn't quite hold up when we look at how the mind learns, adapts, and prepares itself for life. Consider how you learn to walk. Before your feet ever carried you confidently across a room, your brain rehearsed the movement countless times. Muscles fired, balance adjusted, small failures occurred safely and repeatedly. No one would say those early, wobbly attempts were meaningless simply because they were practice. They were necessary. Dreams appear to serve a similar role, though in a quieter and far more complex way. When you dream, the mind creates situations that feel real enough to matter, yet safe enough that no lasting harm occurs. You can fall without injury. You can lose someone without consequence. You can face danger without physical risk. And through all of it, the emotional systems respond as if the situation were genuine. This combination is powerful. It allows the mind to explore experiences that would be costly or impossible to repeat in waking life. The dream becomes a kind of internal rehearsal space, a place where the mind can test reactions, explore outcomes, and practice responding to uncertainty. Importantly, this rehearsal does not follow a script. Dreams are not neat lessons with clear objectives. They are open-ended, they wander, they surprise. And that unpredictability is part of their value. Life rarely presents challenges in a tidy order. Dreams reflect that reality. They place you into situations without explanation and ask you to respond anyway. In doing so, they help the mind remain flexible. Think of it like this. If waking life is a live performance, then dreaming is the quiet time spent on stage after the audience has left. The lights are dimmer, the stakes are lower, but the space is still there, and the actor still moves through it, exploring possibilities. This perspective helps explain why dreams often center around emotionally charged themes: conflict, connection, fear, loss, anticipation. These are not random topics. They are the moments where human experience carries the most weight. The mind returns to them not because it is obsessed, but because it is preparing. It is also worth noticing that dreams rarely replay events exactly as they happened. Instead, they remix. A familiar face appears in an unfamiliar role. A past location hosts a future scenario. Elements blend in ways that do not follow chronology. This blending is not confusion. It is synthesis. The mind is less interested in accuracy than in usefulness. It takes what matters emotionally and rearranges it into new contexts, allowing you to experience familiar feelings from unfamiliar angles. In this way, dreams function less like recordings and more like experiments. They ask quietly and repeatedly, what would you do if things were slightly different? And because the mind accepts the dream world as real while it's happening, the answers feel genuine. You're not pretending to respond, you are responding. This brings us back to an important distinction. Calling dreams a simulation does not mean they are fake. It means they are functional. They serve a purpose. They allow experience without consequence, learning without exposure, exploration without danger. In waking life, simulations are used precisely because they work. Pilots train in simulated environments because those environments can evoke real responses without real risk. The emotions, decisions, and reactions practiced there transfer meaningfully to the real world. Dreams may operate on a similar principle, but with one crucial difference. You do not know you are in a simulation. That unawareness allows the experience to unfold naturally. You're not holding back. You're not observing yourself from a distance. You are immersed. And this immersion is what gives dreams their emotional force. It is also what makes waking from certain dreams feel like an interruption rather than a conclusion. The rehearsal was still in progress. The scene had not resolved. Some people notice that dreams intensify during periods of change, times of uncertainty, transition, or emotional significance. This makes sense if dreams are, in part, a way for the mind to explore possible responses to unfamiliar situations. When the future feels open, the mind explores. When outcomes are unclear, the mind rehearses, and it does so in a space where failure carries no permanent cost. This does not mean that dreams predict the future, or that they reveal hidden truths about what will happen. Instead, they explore what could happen emotionally. They prepare you not for specific events, but for the feelings those events might bring. Seen this way, the emotional realism of dreams becomes easier to understand. The mind is not wasting energy on fantasy. It is engaging in a form of quiet preparation, and yet, this explanation does not strip dreams of their mystery. Because even if dreams are simulations, they are simulations experienced as lives. While they are happening, they are not labelled as practice. They are simply lived. You care, you act, you feel consequences within the logic of the dream world. And when you wake, the question lingers. If a simulated experience can feel this real, and if it can host a version of you that responds authentically, what exactly separates it from other lived experiences? This is not a question we need to answer right away. For now, it is enough to hold the idea gently. It says that dreams may be spaces where the mind explores life in safety, that they are not random noise but purposeful wandering, and that sometimes when you wake feeling as though you've left something behind, it may be because the mind was still in the middle of learning, still rehearsing, still exploring what it means to be you. There is a quiet moment in many dreams that often goes unnoticed. It's the moment when you realize after waking that you are not quite yourself, and yet you were completely yourself at the same time. Inside the dream, you did not feel like an actor playing a role. You did not feel like you were pretending to be someone else. You felt natural. Your reactions made sense. Your choices felt appropriate. You responded to the world around you without hesitation. Yeah, without questioning whether your behavior aligned with who you are during the day. Only later, when you wake, does the contrast appear. You might notice that dream you was braver, or more impulsive, or quieter, or strangely confident in situations that would normally make you anxious. You might remember making a decision that surprises you, not because it was illogical, but because it felt out of character. And yet, while it was happening, it did not feel out of character at all. This is an important detail. It suggests that identity is not a single fixed object that we carry unchanged from moment to moment. Instead, it behaves more like a pattern, one that adapts to context. In waking life, context is relatively stable. Your environment, responsibilities, relationships, and social expectations shape how you behave. Over time, these patterns become familiar. You learn who you are by repeating certain responses again and again. Dreams remove many of these external anchors. There are no resumes in dreams, no social histories, no reputations to maintain. The mind does not carry a full biography into the dream world. It carries something simpler, a sense of agency. You still feel like a center of experience. You still feel like the one making decisions. You still feel responsible for what happens next. But the details that normally define your identity are softened or absent. This is why dream you can feel both familiar and new. You're not starting from scratch. You bring with you emotional tendencies, habits of attention, ways of responding to uncertainty. But without the usual constraints, those tendencies reorganize themselves. Think of it like music played on a different instrument. The melody remains recognizable, but the tone changes. The same pattern expresses itself in a new way. Inside the dream, you do not stop to analyze this shift. You do not compare your behavior to some external standard. You simply live forward. The mind accepts the current configuration as valid. This acceptance is key. It tells us that the feeling of "this is me" does not require a detailed self-narrative. It requires only continuity of awareness. As long as there is a sense of being the one who is here, now, responding to what unfolds, identity feels intact. This has an interesting implication. If identity can reorganize itself so smoothly in dreams, it suggests that the self is more flexible than we often assume. It is not a rigid structure, but a responsive system, or one that adjusts to the environment it finds itself in. This flexibility is usually hidden in waking life because our environment changes slowly. Dreams accelerate the process. They place you into new situations instantly, without explanation, and the self adapts just as quickly. You do not ask, "Who am I supposed to be here?" You simply are. In some dreams, this shift is subtle. In others, it is dramatic. You may dream of being older or younger, more skilled or less so. You may find yourself caring deeply about things that rarely occupy your thoughts during the day. And still, inside the dream, it feels coherent. This coherence suggests that identity is not anchored to specific traits or memories. It is anchored to something more basic, the capacity to experience, to choose, to feel consequence. When that capacity is present, the mind accepts the resulting self as authentic. This understanding also helps explain why dreams can feel emotionally persuasive. You're not watching someone else live a life, you're living it from the inside, with a self that feels valid in that context. And because the mind does not mark this self as temporary or hypothetical, the emotional responses carry weight. Joy feels like joy, fear feels like fear, loss feels like loss. There is no label inside the dream that says, "This version of you doesn't count." Only after waking does the mind reinstate its usual boundaries. The biography returns, the habits reassert themselves. The dream self fades into memory, and with it, the certainty that its choices felt right at the time. This can create a quiet tension. If that version of you felt real while it existed, what was it? Not an illusion, exactly. Not a character. Something closer to a configuration. A way your awareness organized itself in response to a particular world. This idea does not require belief in alternate realities or hidden dimensions. It simply requires noticing how adaptable the mind already is. Dreams show us that the self is not a single story written once and preserved forever. It is a process that can express itself in multiple ways, depending on circumstance. In waking life, this adaptability is constrained by continuity. In dreams, it is given room to explore. As we continue, we will begin to look more closely at what happens when identity persists without memory, when the feeling of being someone remains even as the story of who that someone is dissolves. For now, it's enough to notice this quiet truth, that you have already been many versions of yourself, and that each of them, while they existed, felt entirely real. In waking life, we often think of ourselves as stories. We know who we are by remembering where we've been. Our past experiences line up behind us like pages in a book, giving shape and meaning to the present moment. We remember our name, our age, our history, the choices that led us here. Memory feels essential. Without it, identity seems like it would dissolve. And yet, in dreams, something unexpected happens. You can feel entirely yourself without remembering anything about your life. Inside the dream, you rarely stop to think about your childhood, your job, or the path that brought you there. You don't pause to recall your personal history, and still you feel present. You feel located. You feel like the one who is here, now, experiencing what unfolds. This is not a thin or empty version of selfhood. It is full, responsive, capable of emotion and choice. The absence of memory does not weaken it. This can be surprising when you reflect on it after waking. How could you feel so complete without the details that normally define you? How could you act with confidence or care without referencing your past? One way to understand this is to separate two things we often blend together. There is the story of who you are, and there is the experience of being. The story depends on memory. It is built from events, explanations, and continuity over time. The experience of being, however, is simpler. It is the feeling of awareness itself, the sense of occupying a moment, responding to what is present. Dreams gently peel these two apart. They show us that awareness does not need a biography to function. It does not need to remember where it came from in order to move forward. It only needs a context in which to operate. Inside the dream, context replaces history. You may not know who you were before the dream began, but you know what matters now. You know who you care about. You know what feels dangerous, comforting, urgent, or important. The dream supplies these signals directly, without explanation, and your awareness steps into them naturally. Imagine arriving in the middle of a conversation without knowing how it started, yet still understanding what is being said. You don't need the entire backstory to respond appropriately. You pick up on tone, emotion, intention. You listen, and you reply. Dream identity works in much the same way. It is situational rather than historical. It arises from the immediate emotional and relational environment rather than from stored memory. And because the environment feels coherent, the self that responds to it feels coherent too. This suggests something subtle but important. The sense of self may not be something that exists only because of memory. Memory enriches identity, deepens it, gives it continuity across time. But the core feeling of I am here can exist independently. Dreams reveal this by temporarily removing the scaffolding of the past and showing us what remains. What remains is awareness with direction. You still move toward or away from things. You still anticipate outcomes. You still care. You still choose. This helps explain why dream selves do not feel empty or artificial. Yet they are not missing something essential. They're operating on a simpler configuration, one that does not rely on narrative, but on presence. There is also a gentleness to this kind of selfhood. Without the weight of past mistakes or future obligations, the dream self often feels lighter, less burdened, more responsive than reflective. This does not mean it is shallow. It means it is immediate. In waking life, much of our mental energy is spent managing our personal story. We compare the present moment to past experiences. We project ourselves into the future. We measure what is happening now against what has already happened before. Dreams loosen this habit. They place awareness fully into the present moment of the dream world. There's no need to defend an identity built over years. There is only the need to respond to what is happening now. This can feel liberating, even if the dream itself is intense or emotional. There is a clarity to acting without overthinking, a sense of alignment between awareness and action. It is only after waking that the mind tries to fit the experience back into the waking narrative. It asks questions. Who was I? Why did I act that way? What does it say about me? These questions belong to the story-making part of the mind. They are natural, but they are not the only way to understand what happened. Another way is simply to notice that identity can exist in layers. There is the long-term self, shaped by memory and history, and there is the moment-to-moment self, shaped by context and awareness. Dreams bring the second layer into focus by quieting the first. This does not mean that one version is more real than the other. They serve different functions. One helps you navigate a life over time, the other helps you inhabit a moment fully. Dreams remind us that both are part of what it means to be conscious. As we continue, we'll gently explore how this flexible sense of self contributes to the emotional power of dreams, especially the feeling of loss that can arise when waking pulls awareness back into a single, familiar identity. For now, it's enough to sit with this idea that you do not need a past to feel real, that awareness can stand on its own, complete and whole, even when memory steps aside, and that, each night, the mind quietly practices being present without a story. There is a particular feeling that sometimes arrives just after waking. It is not fear, it is not confusion, and it is not quite sadness in the ordinary sense. It feels more like absence. You open your eyes, and everything appears as it should. The room is familiar. The weight of your body feels normal. Morning light or darkness settles back into place. And yet something inside you notices that something else is missing. Not an image, not a thought, a continuity. This feeling often follows dreams that were emotionally rich. Dreams where you were invested in what was happening, where relationships mattered, where time seemed to be moving forward rather than looping or drifting. The striking thing about this sensation is that it does not feel like disappointment over imagination. It feels like grief over interruption, as though you did not simply stop dreaming, but stepped away from a life that was still in motion. This experience can be difficult to describe because it does not come with a clear object. You're not mourning a specific event. You're not recalling a single loss. Instead, you're feeling the sudden absence of a world that had been holding you moments before. Some people try to brush this off quickly. They tell themselves it was just a dream and move on. But the feeling does not always disappear immediately. It may linger as a quiet heaviness, a subtle pull towards something that cannot be revisited. This reaction makes more sense when we remember how fully involved awareness is during dreams. Inside the dream, you are not observing from a distance. You are participating. You are caring. You are responding to unfolding situations with genuine emotional investment. The mind didn't mark the experience as temporary or symbolic. It treated it as present. So when waking arrives, it does not feel like a clean ending. It feels like a sudden relocation. Imagine being deeply absorbed in a conversation, only to be pulled away mid-sentence. The conversation did not resolve. It didn't fade naturally. It stopped because something external intervened. The sense of incompleteness lingers. Dreams can end in much the same way. The emotional system does not shut down instantly when you wake. It continues to hold the tone of the experience for a while, even as the environment changes. This overlap is what creates the feeling of loss. It is not that you miss the dream's imagery. It is that you miss the version of yourself that was living within that context. In the dream, you were oriented towards something. You had concerns, hopes, intentions. You were moving through a world that made sense on its own terms. When you wake, that orientation dissolves, and awareness must quickly reattach itself to a different set of priorities. That transition can be abrupt. This is why the feeling is often strongest in the first few moments after waking, before the mind fully re-establishes its waking narrative, before the day's identity takes over. In that brief interval, awareness is between configurations, no longer fully in the dream world, but not yet fully anchored in the waking one. The result is a quiet sense of displacement. Some people describe this as nostalgia for something that never existed, but that description misses an important nuance. The experience did exist. While it was happening, it mattered emotionally. It shaped how awareness responded. It engaged the same systems that care, attach, and anticipate in waking life. The fact that the environment was internally generated does not erase the reality of the experience. This does not mean that dreams create obligations or losses that need to be resolved. It simply means that the mind is capable of living experiences that feel whole in the moment, even if they do not continue. The grief of waking is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something was meaningful. It tells us that awareness does not measure reality by duration or permanence. It measures it by presence. If an experience is present enough, if it engages attention and emotion fully enough, it leaves an imprint. And when that presence ends abruptly, the absence is noticed. This can also explain why some dreams feel harder to leave than others. Dreams that are fragmented or chaotic often fade without much residue. There is little continuity to miss. But dreams that unfold like lives, with relationships, goals, and emotional arcs, create a stronger sense of investment. When those dreams end, awareness feels the break. There is something quietly human about this response. It reflects our capacity to care, even in imagined spaces, to attach, even temporarily, to feel the weight of interruption. Rather than dismissing this feeling, it can be helpful to treat it with gentleness, not by trying to hold on to the dream, but by acknowledging that the experience mattered while it was happening. You do not need to interpret it. You do not need to assign it meaning. You only need to notice it. In time, waking life fills the space again. The day's rhythm takes over. Responsibilities, our routines, and familiar identities return. The feeling of loss softens and blends into the background. But something subtle remains. a reminder that awareness is capable of inhabiting more than one way of being, that it can invest fully in a moment, even if that moment does not last. As we move onward, we'll begin to explore how this capacity to live convincingly within different inner worlds has led some thinkers to wonder whether dreams point beyond psychology alone toward broader questions about reality, choice, and possibility. For now, rest with this understanding that the grief of waking is not about losing a dream. It is about leaving a life that felt real while you were inside it. And that feeling, quiet as it is, tells us something important about the depth of human experience. There is a way of thinking about the universe that does not arrive with fireworks. It does not announce itself loudly. It does not insist on belief. It simply offers a picture, then steps back and allows you to look at it quietly, at your own pace. In this picture, reality is not a single road stretching forward. It is more like a landscape of paths, some visible, most not. At each moment, possibilities spread outward, even if only one of them becomes part of your lived experience. To imagine this, it helps to begin small. Think of a fork in a walking trail. You arrive at a point where the path splits. One direction curves toward a lake, the other disappears into trees. You choose one and continue walking. From your perspective, the unchosen path simply fades into irrelevance. It exists only as a thought, something that could have been. Now imagine the same moment, but with a different lens. Instead of the unchosen path fading away, imagine that it remains quietly present, not as something you can walk on, but as something that continues elsewhere. You do not follow it, but it does not vanish. It simply unfolds without you. This image captures the essence of a scientific idea, sometimes used to describe how the universe might behave at its most fundamental level. The idea suggests that when nature reaches moments where more than one outcome is possible, it does not always discard the alternatives. Instead, it allows all of them to continue, each in its own unfolding direction. This is not an idea meant to feel intuitive. It is meant to account for strange and subtle observations in the microscopic world, just where events do not always resolve into a single outcome until they are experienced. Rather than describing this in mathematical language, it can be easier to think in terms of stories. Imagine a book that does not erase its unused drafts. Every version of a chapter continues to exist, even though you only read one. Each version follows the same opening lines, then diverges slightly, responding to different choices, different edits, different possibilities. From within the story you're reading, there is only one narrative. The others do not intrude. They do not compete for attention. They are simply not the one you are inside. In this picture of reality, the universe is like that book. Many versions may unfold, but awareness experiences only one at a time. It is important to pause here and soften something. This idea does not claim that people move between these paths. It does not suggest that consciousness travels from one unfolding reality to another. It does not say that dreams are doorways, or that choices create ghostly copies of your life that you can visit. Those are poetic interpretations, not scientific ones. What the idea gently proposes is simpler, that the underlying structure of reality may be more expansive than the single storyline we experience. From the inside, life still feels linear. One moment follows another. Causes lead to effects. Time moves forward. Nothing about daily experience needs to change. The branching, if it exists at all, happens quietly beneath the surface, like roots spreading underground while the tree above grows in a single, visible direction. Why introduce this idea here, in the midst of a conversation about dreams? Because it offers a useful metaphor, not a claim, a lens. Dreams have already shown us that the mind can host multiple coherent versions of experience without confusion. That awareness can feel complete in different configurations. That identity can reorganize itself while remaining authentic. The idea of a quietly branching universe mirrors this psychological flexibility in a different domain. It suggests that reality itself may be capable of supporting multiple outcomes without collapsing into chaos. Both ideas share a common theme. Multiplicity does not require disorder. Just as your mind can imagine several futures without losing its sense of the present, reality may contain many possibilities without disrupting the one you are living. This does not mean that every imagined outcome exists somewhere. It does not mean that every decision spawns a fully realized world identical to your own. Those are narrative embellishments that go beyond what the idea requires. The quieter version is more restrained. It simply says that at moments where nature does not insist on a single result, it may not choose one behind the scenes. It may allow the story to continue in more than one direction, even if awareness experiences only one. From this perspective, the universe does not feel fragmented or unstable. It feels generous. It allows possibilities to exist without demanding that they all be witnessed. This generosity can feel oddly comforting. It suggests that uncertainty is not a flaw in reality, but a feature. That the openness we experience in decision-making may reflect something deeper about how existence unfolds. Still, it is important to keep our footing. This idea does not explain dreams. It does not prove anything about identity or consciousness. It does not tell us that the lives we live in dreams are unfolding elsewhere. What it offers is a shared language, a way to talk about possibility without insisting on collapse, a way to think about alternatives without turning them into errors. In the same way that a dream can feel real without needing to continue, a possibility can exist without needing to be chosen. As we continue, we will gently bring this lens closer to everyday life. We will look at how choices feel from the inside, how alternatives linger in memory and imagination, and why the mind is so naturally drawn to the idea that things could have been otherwise. For now, it is enough to sit with the image, a universe that does not rush to erase its unused paths, a reality that allows quiet branching beneath a calm surface, and a mind that, through dreaming, already knows how to live inside one story while sensing the presence of others. Every day, without noticing, you leave countless paths behind you. Most of them are small. You choose one word instead of another. You turn left instead of right. You pause instead of speaking. These moments barely register. They slip past without ceremony, and life continues smoothly forward. But some choices carry weight. They feel heavier in the body. They arrive with a sense of importance, even if you cannot fully explain why. And once they are made, they leave a faint impression behind, not as regret necessarily, but as awareness. An awareness that something else was possible. This awareness is a quiet companion in waking life. It does not shout. It does not demand attention, but it lingers in the background, occasionally surfacing as a thought that begins with, "What if? What if I had said yes instead of no? What if I had stayed? What if I had left sooner?" These questions are not always signs of dissatisfaction. Often they arise even when life is going well. They are not about wanting to undo the present. They are about sensing the presence of alternatives. From a practical perspective, the mind keeps track of unchosen paths for good reasons. It learns, it compares outcomes, it uses memory and imagination to guide future decisions. This is part of how we adapt. But there is another layer to this experience, one that feels less analytical and more atmospheric. Sometimes, unchosen paths feel oddly close. You may think about a decision from years ago and feel a subtle emotional pull, as if that version of events is not entirely gone. Not alive in the same way your current life is, but not fully erased either. It can feel like standing at the edge of a foggy field, aware that something lies beyond your vision, even if you cannot see it clearly. This feeling does not mean that the alternative path exists somewhere as a fully formed world. It does not require that belief. It only requires acknowledging how the mind relates to possibility. The human mind is unusually good at holding multiple futures in view. Even after choosing one, it does not immediately discard the others. It keeps them lightly stored, not as realities, but as references. Dreams amplify this tendency. In dreams, you often find yourself living within situations shaped by choices you did not make while awake. You take different jobs, you speak to people you never spoke to, you act on impulses you normally suppress. And inside the dream, these choices do not feel foreign. They feel reasonable within that context. This does not mean the dream is replaying a hidden life. It means the mind is capable of exploring how different choices would feel from the inside, without committing to them in waking life. Dreams give these explorations a temporary stage. What makes this interesting is how naturally awareness adapts to each scenario. You do not feel divided. You do not feel stretched thin across possibilities. You feel whole within whichever version you're inhabiting. This suggests something important about how the mind handles choice. It does not require certainty to function. It does not need to believe that one path is the only valid one. It only needs to commit to the current context long enough to respond meaningfully. In waking life, that commitment lasts years. In dreams, it may last minutes, but the sense of presence feels equally complete. This is why the idea of parallel possibilities resonates so strongly with human intuition, even when we approach it cautiously. We already experience something like it internally. We live one life, but we sense many, not as distractions, but as shadows of potential, reminders that our current path is one of many that could have unfolded. Importantly, this does not diminish the value of the path you're on. If anything, it highlights it. Choice gains meaning precisely because alternatives exist. A decision matters because it closes some doors while opening others. Dreams help the mind make peace with this. They allow awareness to visit emotional landscapes shaped by different choices without destabilizing the waking self. They let the mind explore without committing, feel without consequence, and return without loss. In this way, dreams may serve as a balancing force. They give space to unchosen paths so they do not press too heavily on waking life. They allow the mind to say quietly, "I see you," to possibilities that were never lived, and then continue forward. This can be deeply soothing, even if we do not consciously recognize it. Instead of carrying every "what if" as a burden, the mind lets some of them unfold symbolically in sleep where they can be experienced and released. From this perspective, dreams are not reminders of what you missed. They are acknowledgements of what was possible, and that acknowledgement can bring a sense of completeness. As we move forward, we will begin to look at moments when the boundary between waking choice and dream exploration feels thinner. Moments like déjà vu, sudden familiarity, or the sense that something has happened before, even when it hasn't. For now, it is enough to notice this gentle truth, that the weight of unchosen paths is not something to fear. It is simply the mind's way of recognizing the richness of possibility, and that, whether awake or dreaming, awareness has a remarkable ability to step fully into one path at a time, yet without losing sight of the many that quietly surround it. There is a question that tends to arise naturally once we begin talking about possibility. If many outcomes could exist, why do we experience only one? This question has drawn thinkers from many directions. Physicists, philosophers, neuroscientists, and contemplative traditions have all approached it in different ways, often using very different languages. Some speak in equations, some speak in metaphors, some avoid the question entirely. Here, we will approach it slowly, without urgency, and without asking you to accept anything as fact. Some thinkers have wondered whether consciousness itself plays a role in how experience takes shape, not by creating reality and not by controlling it, but by selecting which unfolding possibility becomes the one that is lived. It is important to say this clearly and early. This is not a proven scientific claim, it's not a tested mechanism. It is a way of thinking, a philosophical lens. The idea begins with a simple observation. At any given moment, more than one thing could happen. Your day could unfold in countless small ways, yet you experience a single, continuous stream of events. From your perspective, reality feels focused, not scattered. So the question becomes, what gives experience its focus? One gentle way to imagine this is through sound. Picture a room filled with radio waves, music, voices, static, signals from many stations all pass through the space at once. They overlap without interfering with one another. The room itself is quiet. Nothing is heard. Now imagine a radio placed on a table. The radio does not create the music. It does not destroy the other signals. It simply tunes itself to one frequency. When it does, a single station becomes audible, while all others remain present but unheard. In this metaphor, consciousness is not the broadcaster. It is not the signal. It is the tuning. This does not mean that awareness chooses deliberately, like selecting a song from a playlist. It may be more passive than that, more like settling than deciding, like a needle finding a groove and resting there. From this perspective, experience feels singular, not because other possibilities vanish, but because awareness is aligned with one of them. Again, this is not a statement about how the universe actually works. It is a way of picturing why experience feels focused rather than fragmented. What makes this idea compelling to some is that it mirrors how consciousness behaves in everyday life. You're constantly surrounded by more information than you can process. Sounds, sights, sensations, thoughts. Yet your experience is not overwhelming, it is selective. You attend to one conversation, one feeling, one train of thought at a time. Attention acts as a kind of tuning mechanism within the mind. The philosophical question is whether something similar could apply at a deeper level, not just within perception, but within reality as it is experienced. Dreams offer an interesting parallel here. When you dream, awareness does not scatter across all possible dream scenarios. It settles into one. That dream feels complete while it lasts. Other possible dreams do not intrude. They are not competing for attention. The mind does not seem troubled by this exclusivity. It accepts it as natural. This suggests that consciousness is already skilled at inhabiting one coherent stream at a time, even when many could exist. Some thinkers take this observation and gently extend it outward. They wonder whether waking life works in a similar way, whether awareness naturally aligns with one unfolding path among many, without needing to eliminate the rest. But again, restraint matters here. This idea does not claim that consciousness causes events. It does not suggest that your thoughts shape reality in a literal sense. It does not imply control, intention, or personal influence over outcomes. It simply asks whether awareness might be the reason experience feels singular. From the inside, life feels like one channel playing clearly, and not because other channels are silent, but because you are not tuned to them. This way of thinking can be calming rather than destabilizing. It removes the pressure to imagine that choices create chaos or fracture reality. Instead, it frames experience as something that naturally organizes itself around a single line of continuity. Awareness rests where it rests. This also avoids a common misunderstanding. The idea does not mean that consciousness jumps between realities, or that dreams are visits to other lives. It does not turn sleep into travel or waking into selection in any dramatic sense. It remains firmly in the realm of interpretation, a way of reflecting on why experience feels the way it does. In this sense, the value of the idea is not in whether it is true, but in how it helps us think. It offers a language that respects both mystery and restraint. It allows us to talk about possibility without insisting on belief. It leaves room for wonder without demanding conclusions. And importantly, it keeps the human experience at the centre. Because regardless of how reality is structured beneath the surface, what you live is one continuous stream, one version of events, one unfolding life. Your awareness is not scattered, it is here. As we move gently forward, we will return to sleep itself, to the conditions that make dreams possible, and to the ways rest softens the boundaries that usually keep awareness tightly aligned with waking life. For now, it is enough to sit with this image. Consciousness as tuning, not control. Awareness as alignment, not creation. Experience as one clear station, playing quietly, while countless others pass by unheard. When night arrives and the body settles into sleep, the world does not disappear. It simply grows quieter. Sounds fade first, then light. Muscles loosen their grip. The steady stream of signals arriving from the outside world softens, as if someone is slowly turning down the volume. And yet awareness does not vanish with it. It changes. This change is not sudden. It happens gradually, in layers. Like walking from a brightly lit room into a dim hallway, your senses adjust. What once dominated attention recedes, and other signals begin to stand out. From the body's perspective, sleep is a shift in balance. The systems that keep you alert to the environment ease back. Breathing slows, heart rhythm becomes more regular. The muscles that hold posture release their constant readiness. The body signals that it is safe enough to rest. From the mind's perspective, something equally important happens. The flow of external information, sights, sounds, physical feedback, becomes much weaker. This does not leave a void. It creates space. In that space, inner activity grows more noticeable. Memories surface, images form, emotions move freely. Associations that are usually drowned out by daily demands begin to speak more clearly. The mind, no longer required to respond constantly to the world, turns its attention inward. This is not an accident. It is part of the design. When sensory input lowers, the brain does not shut down. Instead, it shifts how it allocates attention. Less energy goes into tracking the environment. More energy becomes available for internal processes. You can think of it like a city at night. During the day, traffic dominates the streets. Noise fills the air. Movement is constant. At night, the streets quiet. But inside buildings, lights turn on. Conversations happen. Maintenance work begins. The city does not stop functioning. It changes what it focuses on. Sleep does the same for the mind. This shift helps explain why dreams become so vivid. With fewer signals arriving from the senses, internally generated imagery faces less competition. It does not need to fight for attention. It fills the available space naturally. The emotional systems which remain active during sleep give these images weight and urgency. Feelings guide the flow of experience just as they do during waking life, sometimes even more strongly. This is where we must be careful and clear. Some people wonder whether this change in conditions does more than alter imagination. They speculate that sleep may loosen how tightly awareness stays aligned with waking reality. That with fewer sensory anchors, consciousness might rest more lightly on its usual pattern. This is speculation. It is not a scientific conclusion. It is not an established mechanism. It is a way of thinking about subjective experience. The grounded part is this: sleep reduces the dominance of external input and increases the influence of internal signals. The speculative part is what that might mean for awareness itself. If consciousness behaves like a tuning process, as a way of aligning experience, then sleep may soften that alignment, not by breaking it, but by making it less rigid, less locked into one stream of information. Again, this does not mean awareness goes elsewhere. It does not mean it leaves the body or accesses other realities. It simply means that the usual rules of waking attention no longer apply in the same way. Dreams illustrate this beautifully. Inside a dream, awareness is no longer bound to physical surroundings. It moves through internally constructed spaces with ease. Time stretches or compresses. Locations change without travel. Identity adjusts without resistance. These changes feel natural while they are happening because the mind is no longer constantly cross-checking experience against sensory input. During the day, your mind asks, "Does this match what my senses are telling me?" At night, that question grows quiet. The result is a different kind of stability. Not the stability of the physical world, but the stability of coherence. As long as the dream makes emotional and narrative sense, awareness remains comfortably inside it. This explains why dreams can feel complete even when they defy waking logic. The rules have not vanished, they have simply changed. Sleep, in this sense, is not an escape from reality. It is a transition into a different mode of experience. One mode prioritizes interaction with the world. The other prioritizes integration within the mind. Both are necessary. Without waking awareness, we could not act, learn, or survive. Without dreaming awareness, the mind would lose a vital space for synthesis, exploration, and emotional processing. Seen this way, sleep is not a breakdown of consciousness, it is a reconfiguration. The idea that sleep changes the rules does not mean that anything mysterious must be happening behind the scenes. It means that the conditions under which experience forms are different. Less input, more internal resonance, a softer grip on fixed identity and location. This softness is what allows dreams to unfold so freely. It is also what makes waking feel like a return rather than a continuation. When you wake, sensory input floods back in. The world reasserts itself. The mind retunes, anchoring awareness once again to the physical environment. The dream fades not because it was weak, but because the conditions that sustained it are gone. As we move into the next part of our journey, the pace will slow further. We will stay close to this softened state, exploring moments where awareness remains present even while the body sleeps. For now, it is enough to rest with this understanding. Sleep does not turn consciousness off. It changes what it listens to. It lowers the noise of the outside world, and in doing so, allows inner worlds to speak. And in that quiet, experience takes on a different shape, one that feels just as real while it lasts. There is a moment that some dreamers describe with particular clarity. They are dreaming, fully immersed in the scene when something gently shifts, not with surprise and not with alarm, just a soft recognition. I am dreaming. Nothing shatters. The world does not disappear. The dream does not collapse into darkness. Instead, awareness settles more deeply into the experience, as if the dream has gained a quiet center. This state is known as lucid dreaming. It is not a rare myth, and it is not a mystical skill reserved for a few. It is a documented human experience that has been observed, studied, and described across cultures and generations. What makes lucid dreaming so interesting is not what people do inside it, but how awareness behaves. In a lucid dream, you are not awake in the usual sense. Your body remains asleep, your eyes are closed, your muscles are relaxed, and yet awareness is present enough to recognize the nature of the experience. You know where you are in a way. You're inside a dream. This creates a unique condition. Awareness exists without the usual anchors of waking life. There is no physical environment to orient to, no sensory feedback from the body to confirm location, and still, consciousness does not vanish. It remains. You can think of this state as standing inside a painting that is being painted as you look at it. This scene continues to form around you, guided by imagination and emotion, but awareness remains clear enough to notice what is happening. Importantly, lucidity does not require control. Many people assume that lucid dreaming means flying on command or reshaping the dream world at will. While some dreamers do experience that, it is not the defining feature. The defining feature is presence. You are aware but not awake, engaged but not controlling, inside the experience but no longer fully identified with it. This distinction matters. Lucid dreamers often report that the dream world feels just as vivid as before, sometimes even more so. Colours may appear richer, sensations more detailed. The difference is not in the clarity of the world, but in the clarity of awareness. This tells us something important. Consciousness does not require the physical world to remain active. It does not need constant sensory input to exist. It can operate within an internally generated environment and still recognize itself as awareness. In waking life, awareness is usually fused with action. You see something, you respond. You think something, you act. The flow is continuous and outward-facing. In lucid dreaming, awareness turns inward without disappearing. It watches. It participates lightly. It notices without being overwhelmed. This is why many people describe lucid dreams as calm rather than exciting. There's often a sense of stability, even when the dream environment remains fluid. You're no longer being carried entirely by the current. You're floating within it. This state offers a rare glimpse into how consciousness relates to experience. It shows that awareness can step back slightly from identification without withdrawing completely, that it can remain present without needing to anchor itself to a physical body or a fixed identity. And importantly, it does this without effort. Lucidity does not require constant vigilance. In fact, trying too hard often causes the dream to fade. The state is sustained by relaxation, not control. This suggests that awareness, when allowed to rest, naturally maintains itself. From a scientific perspective, lucid dreaming is often described as a blending of dreaming and waking features. Some parts of the mind that are usually quiet during dreams become a little more active, but we do not need to focus on those details here. What matters for our exploration is the lived experience. A person can be asleep and aware. A world can be self-created and convincing. Consciousness can be present without waking. This gently challenges a common assumption that awareness requires physical reality to function properly. Lucid dreaming shows that awareness is more flexible than that. It can inhabit different kinds of environments without losing its sense of presence. It does not dissolve simply because the world around it is imagined. It adapts. This adaptability becomes especially important as we move deeper into stillness. Lucid dreams are not about escaping reality. They're about noticing how awareness behaves when the usual rules are softened. They reveal that consciousness does not switch off and on like a light. It shifts, it changes posture, it changes orientation, but it remains. As we continue, we will look at moments where this awareness goes even further, moments when communication becomes possible across the boundary between sleep and waking. For now, it is enough to sit with this quiet realization that even while the body rests, awareness can remain gently awake, that a world can be made of memory and imagination and still feel stable enough to stand within. And that consciousness does not need to leave the dream to know that it is dreaming. There is an idea that once you fall asleep, you are completely unreachable. The body rests, the senses withdraw, the mind, we imagine, drifts into a sealed inner world, cut off from everything else until morning arrives. But this picture is not entirely accurate. In certain conditions, awareness does not fully disconnect from the waking world. It does not remain constantly alert, but it can still respond softly, selectively, even while the body sleeps. This has been observed most clearly in lucid dreaming. In these moments, the dreamer is asleep, immersed in an inner world, and yet able to recognize cues, respond intentionally, and even communicate in simple ways. Not through speech and not through movement, but through subtle signals that bridge the boundary between dreaming and waking. To picture this, imagine two quiet rooms separated by a thin wall. In one room, someone is awake, listening carefully. In the other, someone is dreaming, moving through a private landscape. Most of the time, the wall between them is thick. Sounds do not pass through easily. Each room remains its own space, but occasionally, a small opening appears. Through that opening, a signal can pass, not a full conversation, just a tap on the wall, a brief response, a confirmation that someone is there. This is roughly how communication across sleep and wakefulness has been described. In carefully designed situations, lucid dreamers have been asked to respond to simple prompts while asleep. They do not wake up to do this. Their bodies remain relaxed. Their breathing remains slow. And yet, awareness responds from within the dream. The responses are not complex. They are not speeches or detailed explanations. They are simple acknowledgements, patterns, timing, small gestures that can be recognized from the outside. What matters is not the complexity of the message. What matters is that awareness can listen and respond while remaining inside a dream. This tells us something quiet but profound. The boundary between waking and dreaming is not a wall, it is more like a dimmer switch. Awareness does not vanish when sleep begins, it shifts into a different mode. In waking life, attention is directed outward. In dreams, attention turns inward. But that turn is not absolute. Some connection remains. This does not mean that dreams are interactive in the way conversations are. It does not mean that someone can speak to you freely while you sleep and expect an answer. The connection is fragile. It depends on awareness remaining lightly present. Too much stimulation wakes the body. Too little, and awareness sinks deeper into the dream. But the existence of this narrow channel is important. It shows that consciousness is not locked into one state at a time. It can hover at the boundary, touching both worlds lightly. This challenges a simple on-off view of the mind. Instead of being awake or asleep, awareness appears capable of occupying intermediate states. States where the body rests, the dream unfolds, and yet some capacity for recognition remains. This helps us understand lucid dreaming more clearly. Lucidity is not about controlling the dream. It is about maintaining a thread of awareness as experience shifts inward. That thread can be thin, but it is real. And because it is real, it can carry information, not complex ideas, not abstract reasoning, but simple signals that confirm presence. From a broader perspective, this reinforces something we have already seen. Consciousness does not depend entirely on sensory input. It can remain aware even when the usual channels are quiet. It does not require a physical environment to maintain continuity. At the same time, this phenomenon does not require any dramatic explanation. It does not imply telepathy. It does not imply hidden dimensions. It does not imply access to other realities. It simply shows that the mind is more flexible than we often assume. Awareness can rest inside an internally generated world and still keep one small window open. This window is not always there. It appears only under certain conditions, and when it closes, the dream continues without interruption. The significance lies not in the message that passes through, but in the structure it reveals. There is no sharp line where consciousness stops being itself. Instead, awareness flows along a spectrum, from fully awake to lightly dreaming to deeply immersed and back again. Communication is possible at some points along that spectrum and impossible at others. This fluidity is calming rather than unsettling. It suggests that the mind is not fragile. It does not shatter when states change. It adapts. As we move deeper into stillness, we will turn our attention to experiences that sit quietly at this boundary. Moments of familiarity without memory, recognition without context. For now, it is enough to notice this gentle truth, that even while the body sleeps, awareness may still be listening, that the dream world is not completely sealed off from waking life, and that consciousness, like a quiet listener in the dark, can sometimes answer back without ever opening its eyes. There are moments when familiarity arrives without invitation. You step into a room you're certain you've never entered before, and yet something in you responds as if it has. The space feels known, the timing feels rehearsed. The unfolding of events carries a strange sense of inevitability, as though you're remembering something that has not happened. This is the experience commonly called déjà vu. What makes it so unsettling is not its intensity, but its precision. The feeling does not spread vaguely across the mind. It lands cleanly, confidently. You do not think, "This seems similar." You think, "This has happened." And yet when you search for the memory, there is nothing to find. The mind recognizes without recalling. This contradiction is what gives déjà vu its quiet power. It feels like standing at the edge of a thought that almost resolves, like recognizing a melody without being able to name the song. For a long time, déjà vu was treated as a mystery bordering on the mystical. Stories grew around it. Some saw it as a sign of fate, others as proof of repetition, of time looping back on itself. Today we approach it with more restraint. What matters most is not what déjà vu might mean cosmically, but how it feels internally, and what that feeling reveals about the mind. The key detail is this: déjà vu feels like memory, but it does not behave like memory. When you remember something clearly, you usually recall context, where you were, who was there, what came before and after. Memory brings with it a sense of placement in time. Déjà vu does not. It offers recognition without location, familiarity without history, certainty without explanation. This suggests that the feeling of knowing something and the act of remembering something are not the same process. The mind appears capable of generating familiarity independently of memory recall. One gentle way to understand this is to think of recognition as a pattern-matching response. When the brain encounters a situation that closely resembles a known structure, a layout, a sequence, an emotional rhythm, it may briefly activate the sensation of familiarity before confirming whether a true memory exists. Most of the time, this check happens silently and quickly. The mind notices the resemblance, finds no exact match, and moves on. Occasionally that check falters. The signal of familiarity arrives, but the confirmation step does not follow. The result is a moment of recognition without reference, déjà vu. Importantly, this does not mean the mind is confused in a dramatic way. It means that two normally coordinated processes briefly fall out of sync. Recognition speaks. Memory remains silent. The mind notices the mismatch, and awareness experiences it as strange. What makes this especially interesting in the context of dreams is how similar the feeling can be to certain dream memories. Sometimes you wake from a dream with a strong sense that something important occurred. Even if the details dissolve quickly, the emotional tone remains. The sense of having been somewhere lingers, but the narrative is gone. Déjà vu shares this quality. It feels like the emotional residue of an experience without the story attached. A sense of this is known without a reason why. Some people have wondered whether dreams might quietly contribute to this feeling. Not by predicting events and not by showing the future, but by planting familiar patterns. Dreams often reuse structures from waking life. Rooms resemble other rooms. Conversations echo other conversations. Emotional situations repeat with new faces. When you later encounter a waking situation that closely mirrors one of these dream patterns, the mind may respond with recognition, even though it cannot place the source. This is speculation. There is no evidence that dreams create memories of future events. There is no proof that déjà vu reflects alternate timelines or parallel lives. But it is reasonable to wonder whether the mind's ability to generate vivid internal experiences might influence how familiarity is triggered. Dreams create lived moments without external reference. They generate emotional and spatial coherence without tying it to waking chronology. That kind of experience, even when forgotten, may leave behind subtle patterns, not memories in the usual sense, more like impressions. This would explain why déjà vu often feels emotional rather than visual, why it arrives suddenly and fades quickly, why it resists analysis. It is not something to be solved, it is something to be noticed. There is also something deeply calming about this interpretation. It suggests that déjà vu is not a glitch in reality. It is a momentary overlap between different ways the mind recognizes experience, a brief echo of familiarity without a clear source. And like echoes, it does not linger. The feeling passes. Awareness returns to the present. The moment continues. In this way, our déjà vu fits naturally into the broader pattern we have been exploring. The mind is capable of holding multiple layers of experience: memory, recognition, imagination, presence. And most of the time, they align seamlessly. Occasionally, they do not. When that happens, awareness catches a glimpse of the machinery beneath the surface, not as something broken, as something intricate. As we move toward our final reflections, we will begin to gather these threads: dreams, identity, choice, awareness, into a calmer, more grounded understanding of what they do and do not suggest. For now, it is enough to let déjà vu remain what it is: a feeling of almost remembering, a quiet pause in the flow of time, a reminder that familiarity does not always need a past to exist. There is a way to think about consciousness that does not require it to be fixed in place, not anchored permanently to a single role, a single identity, or even a single mode of experience. Instead, consciousness can be imagined as something that visits, inhabits, and then moves on, without losing itself in the process. A traveller, not in the sense of going somewhere far away, but in the sense of occupying different arrangements of experience. To picture this, imagine a familiar house. The structure is the same, the walls do not change, the roof remains steady, but inside there are many rooms. Each room has its own light, its own atmosphere, its own way of being lived in. You might spend most of your time in one room, the room of waking life. It is practical, well lit, organised around tasks and routines. You know where everything is, but the house contains other rooms. There is a quieter room where memories gather, a room filled with images and associations, a room where emotions move more freely, a room that only opens when the lights dim and the body rests. Consciousness moves between these rooms naturally. When you wake, it steps into the waking room and settles there. When you daydream, it drifts into another. When you sleep, it enters rooms that are rarely visited during the day. The traveller does not change houses, it changes rooms. This metaphor is useful because it preserves continuity. The same consciousness that listens, thinks, and chooses during the day is the one that dreams at night. There is no need to introduce copies or replacements. What changes is the configuration, the arrangement of attention, sensation, memory, and emotion that defines the experience. In waking life, consciousness is tightly coupled to the senses. It stays close to physical input. The room is bright and busy. There is constant feedback from the outside world. In dreams, that coupling loosens. The room grows quieter. The walls soften. Images come from within. Time behaves differently. Identity becomes more flexible. Yet consciousness remains present. It does not dissolve when the room changes. It adapts. This adaptability explains why experiences across different states can feel equally real while they are happening. The traveller does not require the same furniture to feel at home. It only requires coherence, a sense that experience makes sense from the inside. Dreams provide that coherence, so does waking life. So do moments of deep focus, meditation, or quiet reflection. Each is a room the traveller knows how to inhabit. This idea can be comforting. It suggests that changes in experience do not threaten the continuity of self. They do not fragment awareness or scatter identity. They simply invite consciousness to rest in a different configuration for a while. Seen this way, dreaming is not leaving reality. It is moving to another room in the same house, and waking is not returning from elsewhere. It is stepping back into the room where the senses are loudest. This metaphor also helps us keep our balance. It allows us to talk about movement without implying escape, about exploration without implying loss, about multiplicity without implying chaos. Consciousness does not need to be everywhere at once. It does not need to inhabit all rooms simultaneously. It only needs to be present where it is. This presence is what gives experience its weight. Whether you're solving a problem, remembering a face, dreaming a story, or feeling the quiet of early morning, the same awareness is there, shaped by context, not defined by it. This brings us gently back to the earlier questions about possibility and choice. If consciousness can inhabit different configurations so naturally, then the feeling of many possible selves does not need to point outward to other worlds. It can point inward to the mind's capacity for reorganization. Different rooms support different versions of you, not false versions, not lesser versions, contextual versions. Each one feels authentic while it is lived, because consciousness is fully present within it. This does not mean all versions need to be acted upon in waking life. Some rooms are for rest, or are for rehearsal, for imagination. Others are for action, responsibility, and continuity. The traveller knows the difference, even if it does not label it. What matters is that movement between rooms is natural. It happens every day, often without notice, and when it happens gently, it does not disturb the sense of self. This understanding restores a sense of calm. It removes the pressure to interpret dreams as messages from elsewhere, or to treat altered states as disruptions. They're simply different arrangements of the same awareness. As we begin our descent toward the closing reflections, we will bring this idea back to solid ground. We will clarify what dreams do and do not show us, and why their value does not depend on proving anything beyond the mind itself. For now, it is enough to rest with this image. Consciousness as a traveller, not lost and not scattered, moving quietly between rooms in a familiar house, always present, always whole, regardless of where it happens to be. After travelling through ideas about dreams, identity, possibility, and awareness, it becomes important to pause, not to retreat, not to dismiss what we've explored, but to gently place it back on solid ground. There is a temptation, when experiences feel vivid and meaningful, to let them stand as proof of something larger. Dreams feel real. Alternate versions of ourselves feel plausible. The mind moves so easily between different configurations that it can seem natural to assume those configurations must exist somewhere beyond the mind. This is where clarity matters. Dreams do not prove the existence of parallel universes. They do not show us other timelines. They do not provide evidence that consciousness travels between realities. Saying this does not take anything away from their power. It simply respects the difference between experience and explanation. Dreams are compelling because they are lived from the inside. While they are happening, awareness is fully engaged. Emotion flows naturally. Identity feels intact. The world, though internally generated, behaves coherently enough to be inhabited. That alone is remarkable. But remarkability does not require cosmic explanation. The mind is already capable of creating complete, convincing worlds without leaving the body. It does this every night, quietly, without instruction. That capacity is extraordinary on its own. Understanding this helps us avoid a common misunderstanding. When people say that dreams feel like other lives, they are describing how experience feels, not making a claim about where that experience comes from. The feeling of living another life does not require that another life exists independently. It only requires that awareness is flexible. Dreams demonstrate how many versions of self the mind can host, not how many universes exist. They show that identity is not a single rigid structure, but a responsive pattern that adapts to context. This insight is valuable precisely because it stays within what we can observe directly. We can observe that awareness feels real in dreams. We can observe that identity reorganizes itself smoothly. We can observe that emotional investment does not depend on physical reality. We cannot observe other universes through dreaming. Holding this distinction allows wonder to remain grounded. It also protects the listener. When ideas stretch too far without support, they can become unsettling rather than soothing. They can introduce uncertainty where calm is needed. By keeping our footing, we preserve the sense of safety that allows curiosity to unfold gently. This grounding also deepens the meaning of what dreams actually offer. If dreams were merely glimpses of elsewhere, their value would lie outside of us. But if dreams are expressions of the mind's own capacity, then their value lies within. They become demonstrations of what consciousness can do. They show us that awareness can create coherence without external input, that it can inhabit stories without losing itself, that it can explore alternatives without destabilizing the waking self. These are profound insights, even without invoking the multiverse. In fact, they may be more profound, because they tell us something practical about being human. They tell us that the self is not fragile, that identity can flex without breaking, that imagination is not escape but function. Dreams do not ask us to believe in hidden worlds. They invite us to notice how many ways experience can unfold within one. This also reframes the earlier questions about choice and possibility. You do not need parallel universes to explain why unchosen paths feel present. You only need a mind capable of imagining alternatives vividly and caring about them. You do not need alternate timelines to explain déjà vu. You only need recognition without recall. You do not need consciousness to be a traveller between worlds to explain lucid dreaming. You only need awareness to remain present as conditions change. Each phenomenon stands on its own, complete and meaningful, without reaching beyond what can be known. This is not a closing of doors. It is a quiet setting of boundaries, and boundaries, when placed gently, create stability. As we approach the end of our journey, this stability becomes important. We're not leaving with unanswered questions hanging in the air. We're leaving with a clearer sense of what dreams show us and what they do not. They do not prove anything about the structure of the cosmos. but they reveal something intimate about the structure of experience. They show us that consciousness is capable of depth, variation, and coherence beyond what waking life alone reveals. They remind us that being human involves more than one way of being present, and that reminder is enough. As we prepare for the final reflection, we will bring everything back to the simplest place possible, the moment of waking, the version of you that opens their eyes, and the quiet continuity that carries you from night into morning. For now, it's enough to rest with this grounding truth. Dreams do not need to be doorways to other universes to matter. They matter because they show how many selves the mind can hold, safely, gently, and without ever leaving home. Morning does not arrive all at once. It comes gradually, even if the eyes open suddenly. Sensation returns in layers, the weight of the body, the texture of the air, the faint sounds of the world beginning again. Awareness, which has been moving freely through inner spaces, slowly gathers itself and settles into one familiar configuration. You wake up as this version of yourself. Not because it is the only version that exists, and not because it is somehow more real than the others. You wake up as this version because this is where awareness now rests. There is something deeply grounding about this moment. After a night of drifting through images, emotions, and possibilities, the mind returns to continuity. Memory reconnects. Identity reassembles. The story of who you are resumes its familiar shape. And it does so without effort. You do not have to choose this self. You do not have to rebuild it. It arrives on its own, shaped by habit, history, and the quiet agreement between mind and world. This return is not a loss. It is a settling. The dreams you leave behind do not vanish entirely. They fade, yes, but traces remain. Not as instructions or messages, but as tones, as subtle emotional shifts, as reminders that awareness is capable of more than one way of being. These traces do not compete with waking life. They soften it. They remind you that the self you inhabit during the day is not rigid, that it is supported by a deeper flexibility, that you're not confined to a single inner posture, even if you live within one outer life. This understanding can be quietly reassuring. It means that the version of you that wakes up each morning is not fragile. It has already navigated many inner worlds and returned intact. It has already practiced letting go and coming back. Dreams, seen this way, are not escapes from reality. They are windows. They open briefly, allowing awareness to look at itself from different angles in different lights, and then they close gently, without requiring anything in return. You're not meant to carry them with you fully into the day. You're not meant to analyze them until they dissolve. You're not meant to live inside them. You're meant to wake up, and waking up matters. This version of you, the one reading or listening now, is the version that moves through the world, speaks to others, makes choices, and carries continuity forward. This is the self that acts, that remembers, that builds meaning over time. It is not diminished by the existence of other inner experiences. It is strengthened by them, because knowing that awareness can adapt makes presence feel less heavy. You do not have to be everything at once. You only have to be here. The many possible lives the mind can imagine do not pull you away from this one. They frame it. They give depth to choice, texture to identity, and softness to certainty. And then, quietly they step aside. There is something peaceful in that restraint. The mind does not demand that you resolve every possibility. It does not ask you to account for every version of yourself. It allows them to exist as background, as context, as unplayed notes that give shape to the melody you're actually hearing. That melody is your waking life. It unfolds one moment at a time, not because it is the only possible song, but because it is the one being played now. Dreams remind us of the orchestra. Waking reminds us of the tune. both have their place. As this journey comes to a close, there is nothing you need to conclude or decide. No belief to adopt, no mystery to solve. Everything we have explored can rest exactly where it is. Dreams do not prove other universes. They do not require explanation beyond what they are. They simply show that awareness is capable of depth, flexibility, and presence in more ways than we usually notice. And then morning arrives. You open your eyes, you return to the room, you inhabit this version of yourself again, not as a limitation, but as a choice made quietly by awareness itself. Many possible lives may exist as thoughts, as dreams, as gentle shadows of imagination. But this one, this quiet morning, this steady breath, this familiar sense of being, is where you are, and that is enough.